Just to introduce myself, hey everyone, I'm Ed Biden. I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Badger. We train people on AI a lot, and so this is going to be a bit of a summary of like what we've learned teaching people about Claude Code and specifically about sort of um, how we help people onboard their teams and some things for you to think about if you're going to onboard your team and make it a success. Um, I mean, just to keep it real, you've probably seen like LinkedIn, social media in generally is absolutely awash with content on Claude Code and very much fear-based marketing, driving making this the hot thing. Um, and a lot of this is based around what you can do as an individual. So what I'm aiming to do in this webinar is actually both like give you some kind of like practical helps and kind of reduce the anxiety a little bit, but also talk very specifically about onboarding teams, not onboarding yourself or using it in a kind of solo or isolated setup, which is fun but probably less relevant for you if you are a leader of a team at the moment. Um, just in terms of housekeeping, I will try and keep a an eye on the chat. But if I don't notice your kind of questions as we're going along, then I will definitely answer them at the end. Um, this is, we've trained hundreds of people on AI. Look, I say this not to kind of not to boast, but more as a kind of like credibility. Why would you listen to us? Like we've been teaching people on AI for 18 months now, and we've now trained hundreds of people on a range of different tools, and generally had good feedback from people who've done our courses. Thanks to Pippa, who I know is on this call, um, taking one of your posts from LinkedIn as evidence of this. So yeah, look, Claude Code hasn't been around as long as some of the other tools like Lovable and Replit, but we've already taught kind of like teams and how to do this. It's not as well as run individual courses. So this is something where we are kind of staying at the kind of cutting edge of what's possible, and we are kind of seeing issues that are affecting people generally a little bit before other people are kind of recognizing like what the problems are. I just wanted to kind of like recap a little bit, because I don't want to take anyone's knowledge for granted. And some of you will be like very familiar with what Claude Code is, others maybe a little bit less certain. So just to make sure we're all kind of speaking the same language, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between Claude Code versus what I'm calling here an AI chatbot, like a web-based AI interface like ChatGPT or indeed Claude.ai, in your browser. So ChatGPT, the sort of web-based experiences that we are used to using AI in for now 2 or 3 years. These are almost like the simplest way that you as a user can communicate with a foundational model or have a back and forth with a foundational model, right? And you've just got a very simple web interface generally in between you that takes your message and then makes an API call on it to, that could be OpenAI's foundational model, or it could be an Anthropic model or a Google one. There's all different um, lots of different versions there. This dynamic that we've got used to is generally quite conversational. So you put in a bit of you put in a bit of context, so you ask a question, the model will come back with something, but often the response that you're getting is like not that insightful given what you've told it because it doesn't have much context. And so over the
Okay.
course of a conversation,
Yeah. I'm gonna reply back to
oh, we just got someone not on mute. So yeah, if you can stay on mute while just so we don't get disturbed. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat. Sorry, where was I? Okay, so yeah, you end up having a back and forth with the LLM, right? Where you kind of over the course of your conversation, you inject more context and you get a better response. What we're talking about when we say Claude Code, and I'll kind of elaborate on this a bit more, is we're not really talking like just Claude Code or Claude Code in the terminal. We're really talking any kind of local agent. Um, but what you've got there is you've got an application that is running on your machine, so on your laptop or on your desktop, that is still making calls to a foundational model, the same foundational model you would make in a web interface. But the benefit is that it is working with local files. it's often got integrations to other tools and apps. So maybe your email, maybe Notion, Google Drive, Calendar, all these sorts of things. And it also has persistent instructions. And that just makes it way more powerful because it has a load of context that it's already got from all of these other things that it's plugged into, which means right out of the gates, it can give you much better and much more useful responses. But it can also then, it's not restricted just to giving you a text-based response. It can actually do things through its integrations with other apps, and by it being able to write and edit to local files as well as being able to read them. So just to kind of double down on a bit, like when we talk about Claude and Claude Code, I mean, like, yes, often what I'm talking to or what I see like most commonly teams are using is the Claude Desktop app. And so they might be using Cowork or they might be using the Code tab there. Um, these are kind of like relatively similar, and yeah, I can get into talking about like which one's better for your team, um, if you're interested. But for the purposes of this talk, we're talking like, yeah, Claude Desktop is absolutely covered here. You also have Codex. There are some open source harnesses as well that kind of fall into this desktop apps kind of category as well. But that's not the only setup we see. We do also see a number of product teams who have access to an IDE, so an integrated development environment. Most commonly, that will be Cursor or VS Code. But again, there are other options out there like Google's anti-gravity. This is a bit more technical as a sort of choice, but it's teams are on it because that's what their developers are using, and so they've ended up on the same tools as their developers. I think going forward, you're going to end up with more and more teams just using Claude Desktop and a kind of slightly more friendly UI because there's less and less reason, even for developers, to be using more technical tools. There are, of course, the kind of original versions, whether you're using Claude Code in the terminal as it was originally designed and released a year ago, or whether you're using a terminal wrapper like Warp. Um, that is also kind of, I'd still like, when I say Claude, I could mean any one of these things, right? They basically all work in the same way. And if you're thinking about what is the right model for you, like just go with like Claude Desktop. You're not missing out on anything by using Claude Desktop, and you don't need to kind of overthink this um, too much. But we'll come back to that. I think one thing to kind of emphasize is even when I say Claude Code, like I'm not really talking about developers. Like, yes, we've got people building things, shipping code with the tools that they're using, but primarily we're talking to teams and individuals who are not developers. They are like knowledge workers, so they're product managers, they're designers, they are executives, they are CRM managers. Um, they are still doing some coding things because Claude allows them to do that. But they do not come to it with a wealth of technical information, a technical knowledge. They're really using it as a kind of, they'd use any other tool like Notion or Gmail or something like this. Um, what can you do with these tools? I mean, like, again, like Claude Desktop, all these local harnesses. They've got some things that I'm not going to go through all the different features and the differences between what they versus the web version, but I'm going to kind of pick out a few use cases that really demonstrate why they are coding and prototyping. We've got like a fairly basic example here where I'm just generating. I wanted to, this is the real example. I wanted to change the colors. I wanted to change the fonts we were using, and I just asked Claude to kind of mock that up for me. It firstly generated these like options. I actually generated three. You can see that's on, there's a little preview panel here on the right hand side. And when I picked one of those, that panel, you probably won't recognize this, but very obvious to me. That's already using our color palette. It's already using our existing fonts as the kind of the background for it. And when I decided which of the code blocks I liked, then it gave me all the CSS that I could just drop into our site to make that better. Now that's a very kind of
Um,
small kind of coding example.
Ed, just to let
Yeah.
you know, your Wi-Fi's coming and going a little bit. You were better towards the end, but yeah, maybe just keep an eye on it.
Okay. Super. I will. Susanna, do you think it's worth me changing location, or should I just, or do you want to see how it goes?
You're suddenly clearer, but for the first like 10 or 12 minutes, you've been quite choppy.
Okay.
As
Is it
usual, the
worth
second
me?
I interrupt you to tell you there's a problem, it fixes itself. But yeah.
Sorry about that. Is there anything else? Is there anything I should go back and go over?
Did everybody get all of that? Or yeah, just stop your kids from gaming. Sounds like sound advice.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Please, Susanna, do interrupt me if I cut out again, and I'll find a better location or switch to hotspotting or something. Okay. Sorry. That was the first kind of example. As I say, this is a very, very basic example of prototyping. People are prototyping, whole features. They've got clickable prototypes, and in some cases, we're seeing teams that have been fully onboarded. The product managers are actually taking ownership of small bits of generally non customer facing code, so internal tools and things like that. Second use case, kind of classic knowledge work. So this is, if you are doing the same tasks again and again, then um, it's very easy to write um, skills which are effectively saved prompts. They're the same as custom GPTs that help you get work done. Now, this has the benefit of, yes, saving you time because you don't have to write everything into the prompt or copy paste it into the prompt box and run it. Um, and you don't have to copy stuff from lots of different tools because they're automatically connected. But also this can drive up your quality because when you're doing something manually um, again and again, like you generally it's quite grindy. You just kind of keep it at the same level, and so you end up like not really improving it. As soon as you start codifying this into a skill, what you find is you notice like where the skill is not working, and you end up upgrading that skill over time. So very, very quickly, you're not just getting a time saving, you're actually getting a quality improvement in the work that you're doing. This example of a skill is, I've got a very basic one that helps me with part of the sales cycle at Hustle Badger. So again, not a product or development use case here, but I look up one of our contacts, I just put in their name. I don't even need to keep it precise. I can be like, Fred, who I spoke to yesterday. And then what Claude will do, because it's connected into my my calendar, my emails, it has access to my call transcripts. It will then pull the entire relationship description, history I've got with that person. It will figure out what was the last thing I said to them, and it will recommend what I do next. So I often use this if I'm just about to go into a sales call with someone, or if I've just had a sales call with someone and I need to kind of think about like what am I getting to, what do I need to send them? Do I need to send the proposal? Do I need to send them some a follow-up email? This will effectively do all the prep I need to do so that I can be super informed for writing that email, which is another skill, or I can go straight into the meeting. So this one absolutely game changer for me. Third one of these, again, just to kind of show you what people can do, is increasingly I'm seeing teams that we're working with are building their own tools. I mean, also this is what we're teaching them, so it's perhaps not surprising. So this isn't just about kind of prototyping stuff that you're going to throw away, you're going to show to your colleagues or show to a few user testers. They're actually building their own interfaces for, again, common workflows that they're using. So this, I've seen designers, user researchers, CRM managers, like all doing this. Like, what do I mean by that? So a couple of examples. The one on the left-hand example is actually it's a tool I built myself. It's obviously a lot of the tools that people build I can't share because they are proprietary. But working with LLMs, I was finding myself doing a lot of markdown editing. Um, there's lots of options for how you edit markdown. You can use text editor, you can use an IDE, you can use Obsidian. So it's not like there aren't other options out there, but I wanted something that was really, really simple and also, good looking and allow me to switch between the source code, effectively like the raw markdown and the formatted version, and building my own version like this took about 15 minutes. So the cost for me to build a tool, which I now use every day, and just makes my life a little bit easier, I know it's mainly a quality of life improvement, was very, very low. This one on the right is a slightly more complicated version, but again, it's still simple. So someone's built their own to-do kind of app. This only runs on their machine, right? But it has all the, you know, it has all the functionality of both a Claude skill or routine. So every morning it updates. Because it's run off Claude, then it's plugged into their calendar and their tools, so it can kind of run through their to-do list and update what it looks like. But it's also got the benefit that unlike just using Claude as a chat interface, it's got a kind of clickable, draggable interface here where they can cross things off by clicking on them. They can change the priority of things by dragging and dropping them around. They can, go in and directly edit what's in their today section or what's kind of like, in their this week section without having to kind of explain to Claude what they want to do in a conversation. So again, very, very basic example here, but I've seen people pulling custom dashboards together, creating pulling their customer call transcripts together and then converting that into mock-ups, building effectively their own proprietary design systems. They've got all their design components in an interface, which they can then drag and drop across into an interface. Again, if you've got a workflow there where you can do, you've got a workflow where you're kind of currently sticking a few tools together, you've now got the option to build a custom interface completely customized to how you want to do it, and also with the added benefit of kind of Claude powering everything under the hood. So that's kind of another way that you cannot do this with ChatGPT, right? Clearly. So just to kind of make sure that make that comparison. Overall, I'd say that means that there's different levels of ambition and capability that we see with teams as they start to onboard to Claude Code. The first level, kind of very, very basic, lowest impact, lowest effort here is everyone gets access to Claude Code. They have put a few local files together, they connect it to their tools, and that's kind of it. They don't really take it any further. That level, kind of the most basic level of using a local harness, I kind of call that, Chat GPT plus or something plus, whatever it is. This is already just dramatically better than using a web-based AI because of all that additional context that you've got. So, the web-based browsers are getting better. They are getting some of the tool access. They are getting projects and things where you can upload tools. So the gap here is narrowing a bit because the web-based tools are getting better, but yeah, the kind of inherent kind of localness and tool access that Claude Code gets you does give you a boost here. Teams that go beyond that, and that's often if they've actually thought about Claude Code, they've had a little bit of training, maybe they've done some internal workshops, then they're starting to create a few skills. They might be shared across the team, or they might just let people create their own skills. And as I say, that's getting them faster results, high quality results in almost everything that they do, right? And then I'd say that the best teams are really thinking about not just how do they use this as a tool, but how do they use this to drive a kind of change in the way that they work. So they are, systematically mapping out what are their workflows and figuring out which bits of those they can augment with AI. They are developing custom UIs to support them. And to get to this level, you're going to need to have internal champions. You're going to have demos. You're going to have a bit of formal training, right? Some people will get to this level very, very quickly, but you need to kind of share their knowledge across the rest of the organization. Like most people are not going to get here without quite a bit of support. So I wanted to try and quantify impact because I think, for leaders, that's always the kind of big question is like, okay, great, this all sounds wonderful, but what's the actual return on investment? And I think that's still quite difficult to make a simple business case for Claude Code at the moment because you can the output that you're measuring or the return on investment that you're measuring is sort of like, well, we do X number of PR, I mean, are we doing X number of PRDs per month across the team and that's going to go up? Or are they better quality PRDs? I mean, like measuring impact of product teams like, without AI is difficult enough as it is. So measuring impact as augmented by AI it's a tricky problem, right? In not having those numbers that I'd love to have right now, a few factoids, that we've spoken to people about, we've seen the teams we were working with. Um, First one, we had a product team who were looking at doing a front-end refactor. They thought that that was going to take them 4 months without AI, and they actually completed it in 2 weeks. So this was across, I think, 5 different products. Um, More of an example of like what the coders, the engineers can get done with Claude Code, but a good indication. Like you're seeing a dramatic, for some type, particularly front end work, you're seeing just a dramatic reduction in what you can build and how fast you can build it. Um, Team size, we spoke to some people, they weren't looking at reducing their team, but because they'd embedded they actually were using Cursor, across their design and product teams as well as their engineering team. What they found was they just didn't have to backfill anyone. So as people left, their team size gradually reduced about 30% over 6 months or so, I think. And so obviously that was, they were still shipping as much as they had done before, but their cost base had come down quite significantly. And a kind of like more micro example, another team we were working with, we had someone um, who was putting together like different bits of analysis, and they said like typically putting together this kind of analysis that they were demoing, that would take 3 weeks to do some good foundational analysis on putting together all their different behavioral metrics and so on. And actually, that was something they could now do using Claude like the same day because they didn't have any dependencies on anyone else, any other teams. And that meant they were just able to go like much faster, quantitatively, as they were thinking about what they should be building. Um, Terms of qualitative feedback, the sorts of things I try to get a bit of a range here of different levels, different segments. This is the person, the CPO, CMO, who's saying like, talking about reducing hire, like never had to rehire, um, but they're just not less productive in any way. They're more productive in everything that they do. On the someone doing CRM, global head of CRM, they set up Claude as their operating system. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. They found that was a complete game changer. It was just like the way that they did work now. Um, and for ICs, they're saying things like it's a big mental shift around the kinds of problems they can solve. So instead of writing a document, they're thinking much more about how they create tools. They're kind of almost going up a level in terms of problem solving about rather than a lot of their day is consumed with like grindy tasks of like copy pasting stuff. Actually, they're thinking more at a systems level about where they should be focusing their efforts. And good example here are probably just like very basically talking about a simple skill that they built to do product marketing, where that used to be like a really manual task that took them, several hours, and now is something that they can do in, really quickly and more consistently again, like because they've got a skill for that. Um, I think one thing to emphasize then, if that's not already clear, is that this is not really like a tooling change in the way that you would introduce a metrics tool or, switch to Notion or something like this. This is really a transformation of the level of like doing a digital transformation if you're a non-digital business, right? This is a depending on how far you push it, right? If you're going to just aim for that chat GPT plus level, yeah, obviously that's like a smaller jump from where we are to where you're going to be. But if you are really kind of pushing towards the let's have skills, let's kind of enforce standards, let's augment all our core workflows, your mindset has got to be that this is a proper transformation that's cultural as much as tooling. Um, so a lot of kind of like making the case for why you'd want to do this. Let's talk about how you actually do it, if that is the case then. There are a few sort of preconditions for success, like things you really need to have in place, and not everyone does. So, firstly, budgets. So you're going to need at least pro accounts and potentially max accounts for everyone. So pro, that's the sort of $20 a month um, uh, a level of license. Max is then up to like $200 a month. That can sound expensive. I'm thinking about rolling that out across a large team. But as I said, like you are going to see some kind of return for that. And that might be something you want to test internally, get your own proof points before you roll it out for everyone, depending on your size of your organization. But working this way is significantly more token hungry than working with a web-based AI. So if your company is really keen about kind of driving advanced AI adoption, make sure they're willing to back it up with a budget. So secondly, there's something here around security and access. So you get most value out of these tools, out of these harnesses when they have the same context as you. So you've got to have tools enabled, you've got to have skills enabled, you've got to have local files, kind of like be okay. That's often the case, if you're a smaller startup or if you are a unregulated industry. For bigger organizations, some of these things aren't taken for granted, and you want to make sure you've got those sort of thought about. And that's again, we've had some of these debates with procurement teams, and I think we can make pretty good cases for why you need some of these things. So if you do have trouble convincing your IT team or thinking through some of the security implications here, then I'd say do have a chat with us, and we can maybe give you a bit of guidance or at least some kind of counterpoints on how to think about it. Context, I say this is not a kind of mandatory, but it's definitely kind of like an easy win for really maximizing what you get out of Claude. Can you pull together probably quite a small set of documents that capture some of the key knowledge around the company, the product, your strategy, your processes, your organization, that you can then share across people so everyone has a starting point of like basic information they can feed into Claude. Fourth one here then is time. So again, like it's a tooling change, it's also a transformation. I would just make sure you're willing to kind of commit a bit of time to getting people up to speed on this tool, as well as giving them the budget and the access. Because if you don't kind of support them in terms of the behaviors they're going to need to learn, then again, they're not going to learn how to use these tools in the same way. Okay, so making rollout success then. A few things here I kind of wanted to run through, again, like how you can, some of the big questions that we see coming up a lot, and thinking through those. So which harness you pick, that's obviously the first one. What tools do you want people to get connected to? How to how to store that local files, and where should you keep them? Which skills do you centralize? Which ones do you democratize? How do you think about that? Do you allow people to build, personal interfaces? What are some of the trade-offs there? And how do you actually kind of do this this upscaling? How do you drive adoption and proficiency at Claude, and what works there as well? So I'll kind of run through these on a harness. As I said, if you're not, if you don't know what an IDE is, if the terminal scares you, if your team's not technical, like do not overthink this too much. Claude Desktop is great. It's the best all-round option right now. It's what most teams are using when we speak to them. The only limitation I'll come to in a moment, is that you're locked into using the Anthropic foundational models. And I suspect that you will want some flexibility, maybe not right now, because Anthropic feels like a good bet right now, but in 6 months, 12 months time, you are going to want some flexibility. So just be clear about how long the contracts are you're going with them. We also see some teams, as I mentioned, on Cursor and VS Code, so they're matching the tooling that the devs have. That absolutely works if you've got technical, more technical teams. I don't think these tools are too difficult to learn as well, even for designers or people you might be concerned about. Like these tools are a bit scary. Like actually, they onboard fairly quickly. And so that is a very good choice as well. Um, but yeah, as I say, these tools are evolving very rapidly. Claude Desktop or Cowork is only 4 months old, I think. And the foundational models are evolving very quickly. Open source models, as in ones that you can run locally or on your own servers, are getting much better and much cheaper very, very quickly. So I would not, I just I'd advise you not to sign like a 3 year or multi-year contract right now on that locks you into a particular provider. Try and give yourself some flexibility. If you set up on Claude or Codex, I mean, like actually switching to another tool is not going to be that big a pain. It'll be a bit of a pain, but not that big a pain because also you can get the tools to kind of help you do the transfer, help you do the migration. Um, Tools. Which tools do you want to connect to? So again, I think of this, the more context that you can give the tools that makes, mirrors what the team members already have, then the better the results you're going to get. So think about the tools that your team are already using, things like, calendar, comms, docs, design, development, and try and connect as many of these as possible. If your team is spending all their time, you've got a sales team, they're spending all their time doing sales calls and they don't have access to call transcripts with Claude, then what they can do is going to be really limited, or it's going to be far reduced from what they could be doing. If your team of product managers is spending a lot of time in Jira and Confluence, writing PRDs and writing tickets, you really want to connect those tools to Claude so that you can get the most out of it. That doesn't mean you've got to give Claude read and write access. Some cases you might just want read access. And that, I think, being clear about what permissions you give Claude, which you can set at an admin level, is probably goes away to answering some of those questions that people will have about, how do I stop Claude deleting everything? It's well, you just don't allow Claude to edit files in certain areas, or you enforce certain permission settings and so on. I would think, if you are running a SaaS business as well, then as soon as you start working this way, you're going to start thinking about well, actually, how do people interact with my tool? And I'd also say as a bit of an aside here, if you're building a tool that is, something like Notion or something like Miro, think about how people actually use your tool. And if they were going to connect with your tool through Claude, what would that mean? And what would they want to get out of it? Because increasingly, I think people are going to be working this way. And there probably is a slight first mover advantage to having a sensible response here at the moment, or a kind of a compelling kind of package. Okay, local files. So all the Claude runs off these context files, your company strategy, product documentation, your PIDs, all this sort of stuff. Where do you put those files if you're collaborating with people? We're used to working a lot with stuff in the cloud. It's in a Google Drive, it's in a Notion page, and these cloud solutions make collaboration very, very easy. And it's the existing way of working for a lot of knowledge workers. The problem is that these are slower and less accurate for Claude to use. So Claude has to make an API call to go and find out what information is there, and then pull information back into the harness to process it, and then send it off to the foundation model. So this ends up being much, much slower than just doing a system prompts basically on your computer to read a file. So you can have your files locally, which is very fast. It's more accurate. It's very cheap for agents. But this then gives you some problems of okay, if everyone's got local versions of their files, how do you control and collaborate between them? Now, developers obviously use GitHub. Yeah, that works. It's, in my opinion, it's not the best solution for knowledge workers because they then have to learn Git, which is not super simple. It's a manual push and pull process, which you might not remember. So the best kind of workaround that we're seeing at the moment is effectively you're mirroring your files locally and in the cloud using something like OneDrive, Dropbox, or Google Drive. So you're pulling a a folder of files, a group of files locally onto your computer, you need to make sure that that is not like a preview or a stub of those files. You've got the whole file there, but then that is automatically keeping everything in sync so multiple people can pull it. And then what you're putting in those files is you're putting, your context documents and your Claude MD files and anything else that you want to be shared across the organization. So like, I mean, like on your Claude MD file here, then this is something worth thinking about as well, what you're going to put in that file. Because there's an opportunity here really to kind of enforce your product principles, enforce your company values by writing them into the Claude MD file. Like that, and that just gets then added into every call that people make from Claude to the foundational model. So people can overwrite those, right? But it does allow you to kind of drive some kind of cultural norms, which I think is quite an interesting and exciting opportunity. Shared skills. So skills, I've talked a little bit about this. It's a reusable workflow with a trigger and an instruction set, or it's a saved prompt is the way to think about it. So if you create one, slash write ticket, whenever you write that keyword, then Claude is going to run through a set of instructions that you have written it, and it's going to do all those things, which could include your tone of voice, or doing research, or calling other skills, or calling tools. So these are very, very powerful things. The tension we see here is that some companies want quite a lot of control over those skills. They only want companies to be, they only want people to be able to kind of use a pre-approved set of skills because they can be very powerful. That gives you some benefits in terms of standardization and control. The issue is that you're kind of killing like ownership and innovation because you're not letting people build them. They're not gonna, if they can't build any themselves, they're not going to have the knowledge of how the skills work as well. And you're also building like a huge maintenance overhead for yourself because who is maintaining that library of skills? So what we are recommending to people and what we're seeing most teams doing is that they're balancing that. They're basically having a core set of skills that are maintained centrally, and those going to be defined by product management case, product ops or a product leader. And then the teams have kind of personal freedom to build off those and create their own things. And ideally, you've then got some kind of feedback process, right? Where if someone creates an amazing skill, they then that might get kind of adopted as one of the core skills and maintained. I say 4 to 8 because as well, there's something about discovery here. If you have too many skills, people will just forget they exist because there is no kind of natural way of discovering them. Or they'll see it as they start to type things in. They start, because you get autocomplete on your skills, but they won't trust what it actually does or know what inputs they should put with it. So they just won't use it. So you need to have a small enough set of core skills that people actually know and trust what they do as well, that they're going to use them. So something that is going to make your life a lot easier if you're onboarding your team to Claude is putting together an onboarding package. So not just giving them access to the tool, but giving them access to a few files and skills. So core files, generally in Markdown is probably the best bet here. But individual files that do a specific job that outline your company strategy, your product details, your objectives, your org chart, like as much context as you think would be useful for a new joiner. If you're going to put together an amazing onboarding pack for a new joiner, create all that in Markdown, put it in a shared folder somewhere, and then give everyone access to it as in the ways that I've discussed. They can all have a local version of it. Then do your core skills. So make both to kind of demo what skills can do, but also to provide a bit of quality control and any key processes. So if you've got a way of doing your quarterly planning or setting OKRs, this is a really good example, I think, something where people almost do it infrequently enough that they don't get very well practiced, but the stakes are quite high. So a skill that coached people through how to set OKRs for their team would be a great example. And your Claude MD, because that is included in every prompt people send to Claude, then you want to keep this lightweight, but it should have things like your company values, decision-making principles, and importantly, like it should be an index So it tells Claude what else it can go and look for um, in the local files or in the skills, so that it knows what's available to it. Okay. Um, Personal apps. So some of those things I showed you, the Markdown editor, the to-do list app. Um, the way that we see this panning out is, you start getting people who are like, oh, Claude is great. I create some skills. So they create some skills, and generally they start doing those on discrete tasks. Yeah, and they're kind of like not connected anyway. Then they will start thinking a bit more smartly about their skills and be like, wait a sec, I'm going to decompose this skill. It's actually kind of like three smaller skills that run in a chain, and I'm going to reuse this skill over here. And they start thinking about chains of skills and having routines that then run on a schedule. So they, triggered on a time basis. Perhaps even thinking about, their work as workflows that they're going to augment. And then you get into, building custom interfaces, as I said, which are kind of adapted to the company, or they're adapted to a person's way of working. Now, there's some benefits here, right? It's really adapted to your work. It makes you super effective. These systems compound over time, and it forces you to think at a kind of a slightly higher level than just getting the immediate task done. You're thinking about, what am I doing with this task, and what does good look like, and so on. But there are some definite downsides as well. So, um, who owns these things? If you have a small team that then builds a tool, who's responsible for maintaining that? What happens if someone key to maintaining it then leaves the business? Do they have to rebuild it? Um, do you kind of introduce security or compliance issues here because of the way you've given access to tools or APIs? And do you end up kind of duplicating your kind of things across different teams or across individuals? Or do you have like drift of standards over time? So this is something where I don't think there's a right answer here. Like, this is going to depend very, very much on, are you working in a regulated business? Like, what controls do you have in place otherwise? But I'd say generally, Claude is not letting people do things that they can't do already. So if you're using a web version of an LLM, right, you're already sending your data to the foundational model. So that is still the same. And if you're connecting to a tool, people are presumably using a lot of these tools just for their own interface already. Right? So if you connect to Gmail, you're not allowing Gmail to do anything different. You're just using it in Claude rather than using it in the, a browser window. Um, so it's less about thinking, should we do this or not? But it's more just making sure that when people build stuff, they're not changing the permissions or the access, or they're doing things at a scale that then becomes dangerous. I can send like one email to a client that says something wrong. That's a bad problem. But if I send, 1,000 emails to customers with wrong information because I've done it through Claude in an automated way, that obviously can kind of lead to different problems. And training. So yeah, as I mentioned, this is it's kind of cultural transformation as much as tooling change here. Some people, whenever we go and speak to teams, almost universally, if we speak to 20 people, then two of them will be like vibe coding stuff in their free time and building all sorts of like weird and wonderful stuff. And then a few people will have dabbled here and there with, maybe opened up Lovable a couple of times, or tried something a bit more advanced. And then probably half of them have just like never thought about ChatGPT like beyond a question and answer engine. So there are some techniques and capabilities here that you will need to explain to people in a kind of more or less formal way. So either a workshop or sending them some videos to watch or something like this. And how to prompt properly, how to think about context engineering, how to write skills, the implications of local files. Like, there's some stuff there you're going to want to teach people. Demos are absolutely like critical for like explaining to people or kind of showing people what is possible, because like any experience, like any, it's very difficult to kind of imagine this, something that is very different, until you've experienced it yourself. But when you can show people like, hey, this is what I've built with Claude, or this is my new workflow, this is my skill, this is how I prompt, suddenly this all clicks. So one of the most powerful things you can do is set up regular demos amongst your team. Have a monthly demo time where you show off what you've built with AI or what you're doing with AI. Role modeling is the other one. So it's very, very difficult for you to drive a cultural transformation if you are not actively living it yourself. And as a leader, you need to be like really visibly proficient and visibly like using the tools so that is seen as an expectation and not as a kind of nice to have or as a kind of bonus thing that people should be doing. And so all of these, I think, yeah, I'm not going to get into kind of like monitoring people's token usage and stuff like that because I think it's a bit crazy. But like these things, this is what we kind of practically see like helps drive adoption and like people enjoying using the tools as well as getting good results out of them. Um, this is obviously all stuff that we can help with. So yes, absolutely go and do this yourself if you want to. There's loads of stuff on YouTube and on LinkedIn, and you can stick this all together yourself. But if you want, us to support you, we can do this very, very well. That's our business. We're in the business of doing this very well. Yes. So three particular ways that we can help you if you do want a bit of support. Firstly, if there's anything here that I haven't covered in enough detail, or you want to talk through how you're actually going to do this in practice, please do hit me up for a free consultation, a 30-minute call where I will talk things through with you. Like no obligation to do anything else, just like a free call to help you figure out what you're going to do. So you can use that link there. We'll share this in an email when we send it out as well. But nice kind of simple Calendly link. And do I have some links? I do have some links I can share in the chat as well. So you can go there. Second thing, if you're like, this all feels great, but I still need to kind of really understand what this means on an individual level, then I would really recommend coming on our Claude Code course, which kicks off in a couple of weeks' time. So we run an exec Claude Code course, so it's all kind of like product leaders or generally VPs or CXOs, C-suite people. Everyone's building stuff. It's very, very hands-on, but we also talk a little bit about what it might mean for your team. And obviously, we do private training as well. So you can send people on our open cohorts, but if you're trying to onboard your whole team, we can either come in and do half day, full day workshops, or we can run remote courses to onboard people as well. Either again, chat about it to us by getting one of these free calls, or drop us an email and we can tell you a little bit more. Right, sorry, I've been talking a lot there. I didn't realize that was going to take quite so long. I'm going to run through all the questions now and answer them as best as we can. Okay. So Suzanne was just saying something. Melissa, is there a governance overhead for rolling out to teams? Evidence in my area suggests a lot of individual people are doing their own thing with variable levels of impact and success. So you can set, the settings on Claude are fairly granular, so you can control kind of what features they have access to, what permissions they can give tools on a fairly granular level. So yes, there is going to be a bit of a setup kind of cost there in terms of governance, but once you've done that I don't see that being like too big compared to what people, managing another tool. Is that what you meant, or did you mean in terms of just making sure everyone's using the tool responsibly, Melissa?
So a little bit of both, really. It feels at the moment as though it's a little bit like the Wild West, which is great. But at some point, we need to sort of bring all the horses together and point them in the right direction. I'm going to stop with all the metaphors, by the way, and analogies. But essentially, it's that sense of at what point do we go, okay, this is how do we understand when we need to establish a rule which is applied across the whole of the team? Have you got any sort of like sense of that really?
Yeah, so again, like when you're giving your team access to Claude, you're not changing the ways that they can interact with any other tool. So if you're worried about them, I don't know, deleting your Notion or something, well, can they do that already? Is that a risk that you might get someone like really upset who on their last day out, at the company before they got fired, deletes your Notion? Like that, if that is already a risk, it's going to be a risk when you give them Claude. And it might be slightly easier because they can just tell Claude to do it. Right. But presumably you already have like checks and balances in place that stop people doing that, stop either kind of malicious actors or careless ones from doing things that they shouldn't, from doing damage to your systems, your customers, and colleagues. So I when you give people access to Claude, yes, you need to make sure that you map those permissions across, but this shouldn't fundamentally change what people can do. And just as you would want to allow people to kind of do most of their work in a fairly like autonomous way, again, yes, it's for key processes, you're going to want to kind of help people do those through Claude in a kind of slightly managed way, but you don't want to restrict too much what they can do because that's just going to limit their, how good they are at their jobs as well as their sense of empowerment and so on.
Thank you.
Super. Ruben asking, do you have any feedback or experience on the quality of the solutions in terms of code produced and supportability? I'd say less on the code side because we do more training on like non-developers on these tools. Yeah, even when people are setting up non-technical people to own bits of the code base, there's generally then teaching like product managers, okay, you're going to be responsible for this tool, great. They're still going to do pull requests, right? Those pull requests are still going to be reviewed by engineers, rather than just shipped straight away. So that it's not a question of the code quality going down because the code quality is like maintained by the PRs. It's the question that do you then have a bottleneck with people who can actually review the PRs? So that's more how I think about it. It's like, what's your ratio of people who can review PRs to people who are then shipping code? Katie's asking, what are the current thoughts on limitations of use, impact, and adoption in regulated sectors? I'm in health tech. So again, depending on the setup you've got here, are you using Anthropic? Are you using OpenAI? They are super keen to penetrate the enterprise market, as you might expect. So they are working very, very hard to make sure that you can use their tools in all kinds of regulated sectors as fast as possible. But uh, that's their responsibility as well. So if you are using a web-based version of an LLM, conceptually, this is not different from using a local harness. You're still sending information to the foundational model, right, and getting a response. And they have their data protection, set up for that sort of thing. But you need to go and check that they're actually kind of covering it in the same way that that you need for your compliance and security. Okay, Lily is asking, seen quite a bit of experimentation recently by Anthropic, either pricing tests or throttling without full disclosure. Yeah, I mean, I think over-reliance is a huge issue, which is why I say, look, all of these solutions are fundamentally the same. So I wouldn't worry about, do I pick this harness or that harness like too much? What I would worry about is like, can you unpick it or not? Like if you need to. So today, I think Claude is probably the best bet for most people. But also, I would get very nervous if, I was speaking to procurement and they were like, well, we'll just sign up for a 3-year, commitment because that's going to give us the best rates. I'd be like, no, 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 no. We probably want to review this in 6 months and maximum 12 months. So, yeah, all of the companies are playing around with throttling, price tests, all these sort of. It's a very, very dynamic sector at the moment. You're not going to change provider every month, so I think you're going to just have to kind of ride out some of those kind of local issues. but you do want to give yourself a bit of protection when you're thinking longer term. Okay, Mark's asking, what have you seen in terms of quality assurance and maintenance, especially if use of Claude Code is democratized across an organization? So Mark, are you talking about like, if I've got my whole CRM team using things, how are they
Exactly
managing their
that.
processes?
And who picks up the slack if it then needs to be maintained, for instance?
Yeah, I think again, we haven't seen too much of this yet because I think we're just really early in the adoption curve, and so people are starting to build stuff, and we know this is going to be an issue for them, but we haven't seen them use it for enough time for those issues to come through. People are thinking about this, right? For sure. You're saying like, okay, like how do we make sure that we've got some kind of checks on what we're doing and we keep these things maintained? I mean, again, I would really lean on like what are your processes already for monitoring what your team are doing. If you're managing 6 people, you already have to audit their work in some way. You already have to have some controls on what they're doing. If their output goes up, if their quality goes up, in an automated way, I would almost be thinking about like, okay, in an automated way, can I audit what they're doing? So can I almost use my Claude to help me kind of like process what they're doing at scale and obviously like the more you can kind of convert it to metrics and so on, like the better. Robin, you're asking, seems like an unsolved problem. How to workflow global versus project versus individual documents and workflow solve for Git users, but unsolved for IDE knowledge workers. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you asked that before I was talking through sort of mirroring or not. That like mirroring is the kind of solution we've seen that works so far. It's not perfect. Um, okay, not really a question. Fine. I will move on then. You've got another question though, straight after that. Any advice on purpose appropriate telemetry tools for measure effectiveness usage or just sticking the same old data analytics? So are you talking then about usage of Claude? Or are you talking about usage of other tools?
Well, I'm talking about being able to answer the question of the CFO about whether this is a good investment or not.
Yeah.
Run through throughput, token usage versus outcome improvement.
Yeah. The Claude Desktop has some of this baked in, where you can see how much people are using it, what they're using it for, and so on. You
I'm
can then
I'm
build
I'm,
your
I'm
own. Oh, sorry.
sorry. I'm really focused on being tooling and model neutral. Like I don't want to be in a spot where I'm locked into Claude because my telemetry is there and also my tasks are there and also my knowledge repo is there. I use Obsidian for a knowledge repo, and Claude can pull it. But also, if I would decided to go to Cursor or Cowork or Codex or whatever else, I can switch out the component really easily. I'm looking for something
Yeah.
similar in a telemetry context.
I don't have any specific advice here. I have seen people building their own tools like with Claude, like
Mhm.
so they've got a kind of standalone bit of software.
Mhm.
That's probably the only thing
Yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah.
used.
We're in Wild West, so it's kind of whoever
Yeah,
decides to build what kind of railroad first, right? Continuing the
exactly.
metaphor, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Any thoughts on prompt and Claude IP brought to a business? Yeah, I think this is again, if someone comes up with a great idea at your company now, um, or a framework, do they get to take that with them to their next job? I mean, it's a similar question, but on a bigger scale. So if someone's built a tool, can they rebuild that in their next job, or do you own that? I mean,
I mean, up until now, they've been paying me for my time building software to improve that product, right? I own the know-how, they get the IP on the product. Now we're talking about significant transfer of IP in the I'm building the tooling that can then be used to replicate me without me being involved.
yeah, I,
There's an interesting kind of extension of, like to what part of me does the company now own?
exactly. I mean, I think
Mhm.
the way I think about this at the moment, if you're a specialist in, I keep going back to CRM, like so you're a specialist in CRM, you build some CRM tooling or like some CRM like skills, like what happens when you leave? Well, yeah, the company can use that in the same way they can use any processes that you've made. Are you still valuable? I think you are, because that is not going to be a static tool set. That is going to have to be maintained and evolve over time. And so at least for the immediate thing, immediate future, I'm like, I think that's where the value is. I think, if companies are kind of like being like, great, build us this thing and then bye-bye, we don't want to speak to you anymore. Like that is quite a short-sighted approach on their behalf, because that is going to break pretty quickly. But I could be wrong on this.
I'm thinking more along the lines of, over the next 5 years, you build this thing that makes you a 100x engineer. You show up to work one day, you do one day's work, and you don't pass your probation, but unfortunately, they now have a copy of all of the IP. I think that there's a real question about how the IP transfer in the hiring process will end up shaking out, probably to the detriment of any working level engineer. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's true, but I also think it's you know, as a product leader, I have a bunch of, templates and processes that whenever I start a role, I'm going to start injecting into the organization.
Mhm.
But the value they're going to get from them without me there is actually quite limited. And if people can build them themselves, then actually, what is the value? I mean,
Yeah, maybe.
we'll see, right? I think it's not something I'm personally worried about, but I mean, also I don't know what you've built, so
Oh, no, 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 no,
you
I'm
might,
not. It's more, I think this whole tooling is really the thing I'm raising is that this whole tooling changes a bit of the power dynamic and the value dynamic of an individual in the context of their employment.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about how it's going to shake out, and whether people will accept that and it becomes the new normal, or people don't accept it and it ends up being oh, I've put a poison pill into my, if I don't type in the right kind of keyword within 30 seconds, the tooling self-destructs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a few interesting kind of scenarios that you could play out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm gonna keep going through the questions. So Alex is asking, thinking about context files across the org, to what extent are you mindful of token count or context rot? Other examples or mental models you recommend? So I mean, I think the main thing to think about here is that point about local versus cloud-based files. Um, if you if you're working through APIs into cloud-based files, that is less accurate. Like effectively, LLMs only sample what they're getting through the API. They're only getting like some of the content, whereas for local files, they're getting a much more accurate, much fuller picture, and it's much faster for them to work with local files as well. So I'm not, if you're finding you're continually blowing through your context, then you can generally like see what you're doing. You can see where is your context window going, and you can kind of ask Claude to help you reduce that. That's not something I'm typically seeing teams struggle with. It's maybe like an isolated case with some individual who's doing something crazy where they're like dumping, thousands of customer transcripts into like one chat window. But actually, yeah, you can then talk them through, okay, if that's what you want to do, there are other ways of doing content retrieval. You talked about RAG, or you create other tools for then Claude to kind of plug into. Third question. Okay. What enabling tooling do you see coming under the pressure? I think Robin, this is kind of like similar to what we talked about with the other code. Like, yeah, but for volume of code, yeah, I don't know. We've got some webinars lined up with people who might have a better answer, but yeah,
Yeah.
we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, it's that theory of constraints thing where you make one part really efficient, and make the engine really efficient, and it's the brakes that start failing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Ollie asking, as a GTM team, we're using Claude Desktop, Notion, and Claude projects for shared agent config. Are we missing a best practice architecture trick here? E.g., should we be putting context locally and using Claude Cowork? Desktop. So I think what you'll find, Ollie, is that yeah, if you can pull some more of that context locally but still mirrored, and then flip to using Claude Cowork, you will probably get better responses. Your setup already though is kind of like it's already doing like some of the basics. So you might find it's more of a marginal gain. It depends a bit what tools your Claude Desktop, the chat kind of tab is able to do, and whether how easy it is to write skills and things like that. So architecturally, I think you're not in like a horrible position, but I would have a play around with putting some of that context locally and seeing how it changes performance. Theoretically, it should improve things quite a bit. In practice, you'd have to test it. Okay. Okay, so just seeing if there's any more questions. I think that is most of them. I don't think I think I've done all of them. But please do give me a shout if there's any others. Anyway, we are a bit over time, so I'll wrap up here. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming along. If you do have any questions, then please, again, I'm just dropping the our details there. Either book a call with me or just drop me an email, and we'd be happy to share what we can in terms of knowledge.
Thanks. It was a great session.
All right, thanks very much, everyone. Bye.